Thank you so much for meeting up with me tonight, Dr. Kita
Appreciate
Ashman. I'm so happy to be having a conversation with Kita. I've been following your work for years. Kita is a threatened species and climate adaptation ecologist at the World Wildlife Fund Australia. She's also a passionate advocate for our forests and all of its creatures, and I've learned so much from your work. So I'm really excited to just have a conversation about the forests and Australia's nature laws and some of the really difficult things that are happening, along with this very interesting, exciting, and slightly daunting election that we have coming up this weekend.
Yeah, it's all happening, everything, everywhere, all at once.
So maybe we can start with just tell us a little bit more about your focus and what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, sure. My role at WWF is really focused around threatened species and kind of doing. It's kind of split into a few streams, but the on-ground components are really doing projects that throw species a lifeline to kind of help them out, mitigate some of the threats that they're facing, especially around climate change or maybe climate adjacent threats. Basically, trying to keep them around while we do the other parts of my role and the stuff that I work really collaboratively with in a broader team on the policy and advocacy and kind of legislation pieces that look to just strengthen nature laws, get meaningful action on climate, try to really shift that paradigm that's causing kind of the biodiversity and extinction and climate crisis.
So, overall, how do you feel Australia is doing?
Um, Not great. Yeah, we are one of the only developed nations, quite wealthy nations, that is a hotspot for the biodiversity crisis and the extinction crisis. Um, we are a major contributor of emissions and fueling the climate crisis. We're a deforestation hotspot, primarily through native forest logging and clearing for agriculture and mining and other destructive industries. We have a huge amount of biodiversity, a huge amount of species, flora, fauna, fungi that is found nowhere else on the planet. So much opportunity, but I don't feel that we're utilizing any of that adequately right now. So I don't think we're doing great, but I think that there is a lot of opportunities to do better.
I love that. I love that framing. I mean, it's so wild because Australia, is this spectacular country and has so many beautiful places, incredible wildlife that's found nowhere else in the world. And it's also like a major draw for tourism, and it's
Totally.
every advertisement that Australia does is kangaroos and koalas and
Yeah,
forests and the reef.
totally.
So it's been pretty wild being on the ground here and documenting what's actually happening and learning about, yeah, the deforestation crisis, the species loss, and yeah, I would love to touch on your work around the native forest.
Victoria, on paper, has ended native forest logging, but we're still seeing um, a fair amount of forest being cleared for other reasons. So there's still a lot of work to be done down here, but the industrial scale native forest logging has stopped, which is a good thing. Still heaps to do. New South Wales is still logging incredible amounts of forest that is home to hundreds of federally listed threatened species, koalas, greater gliders, glossy black cockatoos, quolls, like you name it. These are places that are incredibly important. And one of the main issues, I think, surrounding the native forest logging industry in places like Victoria is it's not sustainable. It's economically not viable at all. It's hemorrhaging money every single year that is propped up by the taxpayer. And most people would be outraged if they found out that their tax paying money was going towards cutting down forests that, basically are gone forever. It's pretty grim for New South Wales. There's lots of opportunities there, and other places. Tasmania still has a really massive, very similar to New South Wales, issue with native forest logging. logging that's happening at a large scale, concentrated in the highest biodiversity kind of priority areas. So it's in those states, it's pretty bleak.
And am I right in thinking that the majority of what's being cut down in our native forests is being exported and turned into wood chips?
That's correct. People are led to believe that we're cutting down our forests to build houses, but that's absolutely not the case. The vast majority of what we cut down from native forests is actually chipped, turned into wood chips, and sent overseas, either for paper or other low-value products like firewood or wood pallets or, tomato steaks and things like that. Just
It's
insane things
heartbreaking.
to be doing. Yeah.
When you think about those
Really is.
those images of those giant trees on the back of logging trucks coming out of in Tasmania, and it's
Absolutely.
turned into wood chips. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. Like it makes
Absolutely turned into wood chips, and not even for a profit.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. This is in New South Wales, for example. Forestry Corporation is the main native forest logging industry, and that's kind of a branch, like an offshoot of the state government. And the plantation sector of Forestry Corporation actually makes a lot of money. And there are some issues with that, and we can go into that if you want to. But the native forest logging branch of Forestry Corporation is losing millions of dollars every single year. In the last 3 years, I think it is, they've declared more than $70 million in losses. That is just, propped up by taxpayers. And we're living in a cost of living crisis. So it's kind of like, why on earth would we continue to prop up this industry that benefits no one? We're cutting down these trees that can buffer us from the greatest impacts of climate, can create much safer areas because they're much cooler and protected. But no, we'll cut them down for a loss and turn them into wood chips to send overseas.
So been following a little bit around what's happening in Victoria, and some really shocking news about the koalas in the Budj Bim?
Yeah.
Bim National Park. Can you talk us through a little bit about what's happened there, how we've ended up where we are? It was a lightning strike in the park, and then there was a fire, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we almost need to go a couple of steps back before the fire to really understand the scope of the issue. The industry has gone out and planted a whole lot of plantations, and they planted blue gum plantations. And we know from my colleagues' work around nutritional quality of leaves, different eucalypt leaves, which koalas only eat, that blue gum is actually a really nutritious species of gum tree. And so what they've basically done is created this huge smorgasbord of really nutritious places for koalas to move into, breed up in, but with very little to no landscape scale planning or permanent supplementary habitat kind of provision when plantations are cut down. And that was one of the key things, the key recommendations that I made back in 2019 was basically, this is an industry that we need because we do need plantations if we're going to exit out of native forest logging. And these plantations were established on areas that were already cleared. We didn't clear forests to then put the plantations there. So as far as that goes, this is a good thing. However, we need to be very mindful of the animal welfare issues that are going to result when we start cutting down these plantations. And so we need to look at, when we cut down these plantations, how much habitat needs to be left to account for how many koalas have bred up and have spent their whole lives, if not several generations, in some of these plantations. Where's that habitat going to come from? How do we connect them into other plantations? How do we connect them into the broader areas of national parks and state reserves? And how do we actually do restoration and replanting of areas to make sure they have enough habitat and that it's well connected? And so a lot of that kind of seemed, from my perspective, to fall on dead ears. To come back to the issue at hand, basically a fire swept through, burnt a lot of the trees, and that koalas were starving. And from everything that we've been told now, the state government has basically said it was inaccessible, and so they've decided to basically hire snipers to go in a helicopter and do aerial shooting of those koalas that were apparently starving to death and in poor condition from the fire that happened a few months ago. So It is a difficult situation. To be very clear, I'm not supportive of this aerial shooting. I don't think it's the best way to go about it. There's no way of assessing a koala's health from a helicopter. Coming from someone who's caught thousands of koalas and done thousands of health checks, you need to have them in very close proximity, if not in your hands, to really assess its health. So
I also
I think,
like for them to say it's one thing if they're burned and they're suffering
yeah,
burned and they're going to be, but it's another thing to say their food source is gone. Well, we've destroyed the native forests. They've moved in.
that's right.
The plantations are in some cases all that's left for them. So it
Yeah.
feels a bit shady to then go and say, oh, their food sources are gone, so now we're going to kill them.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the issue that I've been raising for years now, which is, well, their food sources might be gone, but what is the issue at the landscape scale here? And like in the lead up to that fire, what plantations were harvested? What type of movements and abundances were we seeing in surrounding native vegetation and plantations? Like there's just been no, from my perspective, there's been little to no forward planning about this issue. And I've been sounding, I and others, many others, carers and other citizen scientists in this region have been sounding this alarm for, literally years now. And my research came out in 2019 and some other papers in 2020. If the government had have listened then and the plantation industry had have been held accountable to the degree of landscape change that they've created and actually gone, okay, well, actually, we need to create corridors or we need to do replanting or restoration of these adjacent areas, or we need to make sure when we harvest this plantation, they can move into this plantation. And there's like a stepwise process. That could have all been done 5 years ago.
I mean, I'm seeing a number of 700 koalas shot aerially.
Yeah.
It's a huge number of animals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a massive number. And what concerns me is like they do shooting for brumbies, right? And horses. And I don't want to get onto a very other spicy issue. We don't need to go there. But horses are huge, right? Like I'm sure that these are, I would really hope that these are well-trained people who are able to euthanize like that. But how many koalas have joeys? How many of them are actually kind of instantly gone? And how many, I don't think that there is any way that you can do a health assessment or even really see whether or not an animal is burned, to what degree, what its condition is, anything like that. You can't do that from a helicopter. So it really doesn't make sense to me. And I think beyond the what I feel is the animal welfare issue here, there's also the issue of doing this in a really shady way. The community is outraged and people beyond that community are outraged. Like, where was the consultation?
Yeah, it just is. It's really wild. It is, it's heartbreaking. It's so sad, Kita.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been pretty bleak. And you just, I spend a lot of my time just going like pulling my hair out. What can I do to help? And, receiving really concerned and really like heartbroken DMs from people who are in that community who are saying, can you help me? And I'm doing everything I can. And, I'm calling my contacts and I'm briefing journalists but, unless we get that shift in actually the government holding the industry accountable, or some of my colleagues at ANU and other universities have been talking about and have approached the industry talking about trialing different cultivars to not plant blue gum so that these areas don't become these massive kind of overabundance issues for koalas down there. And so far that's also fallen on deaf ears. But, that research could be funded and we could be planting eucalypt species that probably still will provide some habitat to koalas, but are not going to be like
a buffet.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to create this overabundance issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect segue for the upcoming federal election. And for people who are feeling concerned about what's happening to the native species and the ecosystems in Australia, we see all over social media right now, vote for nature. In your opinion,
Hmm.
what does that mean? What does voting for nature in this year's election look like?
I'm not going to tell people who to vote for, um, but I can give people a bit of an indication of how to inform their vote. And so there's two main things. And I saw somebody actually on TikTok posting about this, and maybe we can include some link to something at some stage. But Braden Hill did an amazing TikTok post about how to inform your vote. We at WWF also did a scorecard, which basically shows you, and I'm happy to send people links, shows you how all of those kind of major parties and some independents, how they stack up for policies for nature. It's a really good one-stop shop for people to inform themselves.
Amazing. That sounds really useful. Thank you so much. We've got 3 minutes, and in our final 3 minutes, what I would love is something on how you stay hopeful and motivated
Oh
and
my God.
how you deal. How are you dealing?
Not well. No. I I guess there's a few things. So when I first got into the not-for-profit space, it was quite challenging, and I was dealing with a lot of existential dread. And so that's when I started running, and then I got really into trail running. And anybody who follows me probably sees that I'm doing a lot of that. So that's like a pretty key crutch and mental health strategy. The other thing, more at a fundamental level, doing the best that I can, knowing that that will never be enough individually, but collectively it might be. And so giving myself some grace just around, you're doing the best that you can. And as long as you keep trying and being authentic and being kind, then that's really all any of us can do. So I think it's important for people to remind themselves of that. Switching off. I know it's probably like a huge privilege for a lot of us in this country where we're not experiencing the massive impacts yet of the poly crisis, climate, everything else. Um, but I'd really encourage people to take time off away from being so connected. I really don't think that we are evolved to
No,
be this connected.
we're not.
Um, so switching off. But yeah, I guess in terms of keeping hope, I know that's a lot of things, but the last thing I guess I'd say is on being hopeful. Um, I have a love-hate relationship with people, and so I think people are heartbreakingly both the problem and the solution.
I love
And so staying hopeful that even when you see somebody or many somebodies being the problem, knowing that your community, everything you're doing, everything that the people around you are doing is also the solution is just one of the kind of reframes that helps to keep me hopeful and helps to keep me going.
so beautifully and eloquently put, Kita. That's amazing. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
that's right. No problem.